What's the kingdom trajectory? Well, of course, in the kingdom there will be no giving of marriage. Women will not be subordinated to men in heaven. In heaven we will all be like the angels. We will all be co-equal. That verse about being like the angels doesn't mean we won't know who, we won't recognize anybody. I have no idea where that came from. There's nothing in the Bible that indicates that we won't know each other in heaven. I mean, where did that come from? Being like the angels simply means that we won't have bodies like this, I assume. It'll mean we will be not married like angels don't marry. And so women will certainly have equal authority to men in heaven. What reason would stop us from doing that down here? There may be reasons, but it's at least a question. Verse 4, every man who prays or prophesies with something on his head shames his head. What does this mean? I don't know. Here's some possibilities. And every wife, wait, I had something there. Every wife who prays or prophesies with uncovered head shames her. Okay. Huh. That's strange. Let me go back to this one. I thought I put things here. Roman men did cover their head when they offered sacrifices. That's one suggestion. One suggestion is that Paul is dialoguing with Roman culture and suggesting that you shouldn't look like the Romans do. But I think probably lying behind this is some of the theology of 2 Corinthians 3 that we'll get to before the course is over for Corinthians people. In 2 Corinthians 3, Paul suggests that Moses in the Old Covenant had to cover his face. And the reason that Moses covered his face was so that Israel couldn't see that the glory of the Old Covenant was fading. And so Moses says that we have unveiled faces so that the glory of Christ will be revealed. So it's possible that Paul thinks of, I know this is strange, but men need to have their head uncovered so that the glory of God can be properly reflected. The covering implies a protection of shame, but the uncovering implies a reflection of glory. I know that's not the way we think, but Paul's not writing to us. He's writing to ancient Corinthians. And so a man should have his, not that all men were bald, but a man should have his head uncovered so that he can reflect God's glory. And every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered shames her head. That's a double entendre. She shames her head, and she shaves her husband's head. So any woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered shames. It's the same as if shaving off your head. And at this point, the whole congregation goes, ooh. I may be wrong, but I would disagree, for example, with my sister that the issue here is about long or short hair. I think the assumption is of that culture that women will have long hair. I mean, that's just the assumption. And so when Paul says, if you're not going to veil your head, why don't you just cut it off? And everybody goes, ooh, no, we wouldn't want to do that. I don't think there's anybody at Corinth that's really, Blomberg would disagree. I don't think there's anybody at Corinth who's really seriously thinking about having a nice little short, haircut.
Could you address a little bit of what Blomberg said about the whole homosexuality thing with the hair length?
Yeah, he's, and I don't know, he didn't give any quotes. He's a smart guy, so I assume he could produce some. But he's arguing that a short-haired woman might be thought of as somewhat lesbian, as a possibility.
In the Corinthian culture?
I think he is. Although he also suggests that in a Jewish context, that would be something that you might do to an adulteress. Get on the razor, make her go around shaving. And similarly, he says that a man with long hair might have been thought of as homosexual. I'd like to see his references there, because he then goes on to say that the Spartan men were known for having shorter length hair, and of course the Nazarites had long hair, and all the pictures of Jesus I have in my home have long hair, although Jesus probably didn't have long hair. Jesus probably had short hair, I guess, because he wasn't a Nazarite. John the Baptist probably had long hair. So I don't know where he gets that from. Maybe he's reading our categories into that world. But he's a smarter guy than I am, so it's email.
You already addressed the John Baptist, the long hair stuff.
Yeah. Okay, well, you'll be happy to know there's only 4 more minutes. It's much more boring with PowerPoints, I'm sorry. I'm probably boring all the time, but anyway. Okay, possibilities. Is he talking about hair length when he says uncovered head? Is he talking about hairstyle? Or is he talking about a hair covering? Blomberg goes with hair length, although, you know, he's pretty even-handed. And then I go with hair covering, although I think I admit that I don't have an absolute watertight case. Any thoughts? I wanted to give you some examples, and probably we'll close with this. These examples kind of tipped me over the edge toward it being a hair covering, because apparently there is a Jewish tradition about women wearing veils. So here's Philo. Here, this is on adulteresses. The priest, after taking the offering and removing the woman who's committed adultery, removing her head covering. Okay, so women had head coverings, at least in Egypt. Jewish women. Let him hand the offering to the wife. I'm sorry, the head covering to the wife, so that she might be judged with her head bared, having been stripped of the symbol of modesty. So you see, I interpret 1 Corinthians 11 as being about proper modesty of a woman in the presence of other men. Angels who are thought of as male, and God is putatively male. I don't know if you're going to hear John Oswald today in 10 minutes, but you heard his quote yesterday. I forget, it had something to do with genitalia. But anyway, the quote that I remember for in seminary is that God has no penis. I don't know what it is with Old Testament props. But anyway, basically, his point is that it would be actually somewhat blasphemous to say that God is literally male, because that would imply that he had certain equipment. And of course, that's exactly what Israel distinguished itself from in the ancient world. The Canaanite gods, the gods of the... In fact, Oswald talked about circumcision yesterday and alluded to some of the grotesque figurines that we found from the ancient world of how sexualized the fertility gods like Baal and that sort of thing were. But nevertheless, despite the fact that God is not literally male, God is putatively male. That is, that the Bible, for the most part, there are some female images used of God. I'm sure you've looked at those, or maybe you haven't. There are some female images used of God in the Old Testament, but primarily masculine imagery is used of God in the Bible. And so there's a comment a little bit later here where Paul says, doesn't nature even tell you that you shouldn't be praying to God without your head covered? And I think the dynamic there is, again, is that this idea of being modest. I mean, even if I knew I had a church entirely to myself, let's say that I was in a final strange illustration by Ken Schenck. Let's say that my house is my parsonage is attached to a church. And let's say there's nobody around, absolutely nobody around. And I'm going to go pray after my shower. Now, I'm not going to just finish my shower and go naked into the church and pray to the Lord. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put some clothes on before I go pray. I see some of those dynamics at work here. Put a veil on if you're going to pray to God. I mean, good grief, there are angels and God listening in on your prayers. Be modest. Be a woman of honor, which, of course, we would probably say different things today. It's an indication of how incarnated some of this language is in 1 Corinthians 11. Well, okay, time's up. Finish going through these verses real quickly on Thursday and launch into the next set in chapter 14 of 1 Corinthians. Thank you.